Howdy, everybody. So glad to have you with us for Rachel's presentation tonight. Really excited to learn from her wisdom and that collective wisdom of Nidito, which is a great organization here in our lovely community of Tucson, Arizona. I'm Julie Evans. I'm the executive director with Roots and Roads, and I know most of you but for those of you who are new, our vision is to transform the end of life into the final act of living well. And we go about that in several ways, one of which is doing exactly what we're doing together tonight, which is end of life education. We touch on a lot of topics. If you haven't ever been with us before for one of these, we have our past sessions that very few that we're not allowed to tape. Most of them we are. So those are archived on our website. So end of life education is a big thing that we do. Another big thing that we do is financial assistance to hospice patients of limited means and their families to meet their basic needs while they're going through the end of life process, because of course are so many things, so many expenses that aren't covered by health insurance, and obviously people aren't able to work and be ill and be caregiving while all that's going on. So it's really our honor to be able to provide that to hospice patients in our community. And then a newer development, we spent the better part of last year developing something called the Crosswalk, which is an online resource that pulls together information about all things end of life, beginning with, questions to ask your doctor when you receive a life-limiting or serious illness diagnosis, all the way through death to funeral arrangements to bereavement to everything in between. Our hope being that during those precious moments that you should be spending with your loved one, we don't want people to have to go out searching all over for answers and for resources. So if you haven't had a chance to visit the Crosswalk, we invite you to, and to let us know what's missing, any great resources that you know of, maybe that we haven't captured. And so thank you very much for being with us tonight. I will turn it over to our Director of Community Engagement, David Fife.
Thanks so much, Julie. And welcome back to so many folks, and there might be some new people with us tonight. I want to begin by thanking so many people. These individuals that are on your screen now made donations specifically to make it this evening's education event possible. So we are so grateful to these people, not only for tonight, but their long-time support and participation in our education activities. So thank you so much. And we want to also take a moment to recognize some of our sponsors this year. The Legacy Foundation of Southeast Arizona is a year-long sponsor and making the year of carrying our grief series possible. But then we also have a number of individual session sponsors like Right at Home, In-Home Care and Assistance, Pima Council on Aging, Harmony Community Healthcare, and Casa de la Luz Hospice. We're so grateful for their longtime support of Roots and Roads and our mission and vision, and specifically for their efforts to bring this series to the community this year. So thank you so much. And now we want to warmly welcome Rachael Blackketter. She is Nidito's Education and Engagement Manager. As Julie said, Nidito is an amazing organization here in Tucson, whose mission is to create a community of acceptance and understanding for those grieving a serious medical condition or death. And their vision is that Southern Arizona becomes a compassionate, grief-informed community, ensuring that no child grieves alone. Roots and Roads joins Nidito in this mission and vision, and we're so grateful to have their partnership on so much of the work that we do together. Now, Rachel is, as you can see from her bio, is passionate about training the community in ways that they can walk alongside those who are grieving. Her career spans 2 decades. It also in the child welfare space. It includes foster care and time in the juvenile justice system and her work there. So we are grateful for her wealth of experience, her passion for this work, and for the time that she's offering us tonight. Rachel, thank you so much, and we're going to turn things over to you now.
Gotta quickly unmute myself. Thank you so much, David, and Julie and Jennifer for organizing this wonderful conference and for having myself and Nidito here this evening. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and get started on the presentation. So just bear with me for just 1 second. All right, does that look all right? Okay. So as David shared, we are on a mission to create that grief-informed community of acceptance and safety for children and families who are grieving. We are, for those of you who aren't aware, not everybody has heard of Nidito. We are located in Tucson here at Prince and Mountain, and we do offer support for children ages 4 through 18, as well as teens and young adults in several different programs, one in partnership with Goodwill Metro called our Opportunity Youth. We are also newly partnering with our family and their population of teens and young adults as well, that we're really excited about that work as it grows and expands. We also support caregivers and parents as they are supporting and grieving their own death and supporting their children who are grieving either a death loss or that loss of health from a serious medical diagnosis. We do offer all our programs free in Spanish and when needed in English and when needed in Spanish. So before we get started and kind of dive into our grief education that we're going to do tonight and how to be a supportive, caring adult for those that are grieving, just want to remind you that sometimes I think this community is probably very familiar with, but sometimes these types of talks can activate or trigger something in your own history, in your own background, in your own grief experience. So please feel very comfortable taking care of yourself. If you need to, turn your camera off or step aside and take some deep breaths or have a drink of water, whatever you need to do to kind of regulate or calm your system. I do recommend, if you're able, to spend some time maybe on a patio, or if you can take a walk outside after this presentation, just to let your body restore and come back to a place of grounding and centering if you feel at all activated or stirred up or triggered by anything that we cover tonight, or it feels heavy for you today. We're going to cover tonight 3 basic objectives. What is children's grief? We're going to talk, like I mentioned, a little bit about how to support children and others who are grieving, and then we'll cover briefly our programs and services if I haven't already mentioned them throughout the presentation. I usually end up sprinkling them in. So when we talk about grief, we want to talk about this multifaceted response, right? But at its core, grief is that emotional reaction, or can be an emotional reaction. It's the way that we feel when someone we love is taken away from us. Grief is very individual, and it impacts our whole life, and especially those of children. And so they often have these secondary losses, right? We see those listed on the slide, these loss of friendships, the loss of school routine, of certainty or normalcy, or a loss of activities. A child can also feel grief from a recent incarceration or deportation, or even deployment of a military parent. So at Nidito, we focus primarily on death loss, but these are other things that a child may feel deep grief about, especially in terms of their parents or caregivers or even siblings. We also see grief when we talk about children who've been removed from their families through foster care. So while we will be focusing on death loss, most of the principles that we're going to talk about tonight do apply to other forms of grief when we're specifically talking about children. So grief is very individual. That is something that Nidito's almost 30 years of experience doing peer support groups with children in the Tucson community has taught us. But as well, the research and the data tells us that as well, combined with our own personal experience for those of us who also are grievers. There are many factors that can affect how that presents or what it looks like in each individual person. Some of those are the nature of the loss or how it happened. So we don't compare grief. That's a really big tenet or precept at Nidito. There is no grief that is worse or harder or more than another person's grief. But the nature of that loss deeply impacts how a person or how a child grieves. And we talk about that when we talk about whether it was traumatic or sudden. So we can imagine when a child has maybe had a parent that is diagnosed with something such as cancer, and it's expected and they have time to prepare, maybe even say goodbye, how that grief is going to present differently than a child who goes to school and comes home and a parent has perhaps died in a vehicle collision or a car crash. So the nature of that loss does deeply impact how a child grieves. We can also talk about the nature of the relationship. So if a child has a positive relationship with their loved one who dies, that's going to look different than if they had a negative or estranged relationship. Sometimes the feelings that a child has when perhaps they were in or out of relationship, right? In a broken relationship with a parent or caregiver or other loved one in their life, they may experience relief. And that can be jarring or disorienting for other adults in their life. Sometimes we talk about disenfranchised grief, which is when they don't have permission in one way or another or recognition to grieve. And so when we have a child who maybe has been removed from an abusive parent, or when they have a parent who maybe struggled with substance use disorder and they die, they may experience feelings of relief that that person is no longer in their life. They may also still be very, very sad and be grieving that person. And sometimes people will make false assumptions, right? Other adults in their life, well, but that person was cruel to you, or you had to be removed from them. They weren't fit or appropriate or whatever, right? These wrong assumptions that we make. So we need to be very careful when we're dealing with children, especially, to understand that whatever emotions they're experiencing, they are normal. They are going to be very unique. These factors just affect that, and to just affirm and acknowledge them and meet them where they are with whatever the nature of that relationship is. Another thing that can affect how a child grieves is whether the death was a stigmatized death or not. So that's kind of going back up to the nature of that loss. So if we have a stigmatized death, that is death by suicide, maybe death by homicide or gun violence or substance abuse or substance use disorder, that can deeply affect how a child grieves. They may feel much more isolated or alone when there is a stigmatized death in their life because they may not feel like they can discuss it or talk about it. People may not want to hear about it, or they may be even more uncomfortable hearing about a stigmatized death than they would about a death that is perhaps more acceptable. And then that can lead to friends and family going silent, maybe not doing the normal things that we do when someone dies, like bringing food or offering cards. Those things tend to fall by the wayside when we're talking about a stigmatized death. And all those things, right? All this complexity comes together to really affect how a child is going to grieve. We also want to talk about their age. We're going to move in here shortly into some ages and stages, developmental milestones for children and how they grieve through different periods of their development. Gender can impact how someone grieves, as well as their cultural background. We want to think about how do they speak about death? How do they speak about someone when they die? Do they say die? Do they speak of the dead? Do they talk about soul or spirit? We want to be sensitive to these things when we are interacting with, supporting, and working with anyone really who's experienced a death loss, but especially children. Religious background also really impacts how people grieve. Maybe there's different rites or rituals or ceremonies or services or celebrations that happen in their religious practice or wisdom tradition that maybe you as a caring adult don't experience or aren't familiar with. So we want to take the time to appreciate and be sensitive to all of these factors as we support grieving children. So we'll move into these different stages or ages or developmental milestones of grief. The important thing to remember here is that children's grief is not miniature or mini adult grief. Children do not grieve how adults grieve. So they are more likely to grieve in spurts. They're very physical in their grief. Their bodies need movement and physical expression, creative outlets through music, imagination, art. I heard someone recently talk about adult grief and childhood grief in terms of eating an apple. So adults, if we eat an apple, we're pretty focused on the apple. We're gonna just eat the apple. We all have our way of working around the apple. I do it differently than my husband, so all adults don't do it the same. But we focus on that apple, and typically we're gonna eat it until it's gone, and then we'll throw it away. And if you've been around children who are eating an apple, especially a whole one that hasn't been sliced up, they do it a little bit differently. So they may take a bite and set it down and go play. They may take a bite and then go watch a TV show. They may take a bite and go tussle with their sibling, right? And that apple may turn withered and brown before they ever really finish that apple. And so that's kind of a word picture, or I'm sorry, a mental picture that you can have of the differences between adult grief and children's grief. Children can only handle small bites of that apple or of that grief at a time, and then they're going to go play. They're going to go do something else. They're going to interact with people. They're going to be imaginative. They're going to move their bodies. They are not developmentally able to eat the whole apple or focus on or think about or move through their grief in the same way that an adult can. And so we want to make sure as we're supporting children that we're offering them those ways of grieving besides maybe just dialogue or presenting in a way that we would grieve. So with our youngest children, kind of losing the title of my slides here with the Zoom. There it goes. Okay, I moved my mouse. With our 0 to 2 years of age, we want to just realize here, just like our quote down at the bottom in green by Dr. Alan Wolfelt, anyone old enough to love is old enough to grieve. So babies develop this idea of object permanency somewhere around about 6 months to 12 months of age. And what object permanency is that, that peekaboo game that we're also familiar with playing. It's played the world round in many variations, but that children learn that when something disappears from view, that it has permanency, that it doesn't just disappear or dissipate. And so they do form attachment. They will miss a caregiver or a sibling or someone that they were close to when they die, even if they don't have that more firm concept that we have of death or of someone being gone. They will often mirror the grief response of their primary caregiver. So if their primary caregiver is having trouble sleeping, the infant or young child frequently also will. If they're eating less or eating more, if they're you'll often see fussiness or this inability to settle, and that's usually because they are closely mimicking or mirroring the grief response of their adult or caregiver. When we talk about children 2 to 6 years of age, these preschoolers, maybe kindergartners, they really they developmentally don't understand the permanency of death, and so they may struggle to understand that death is the end. We talk about children in this age at Nidito as the importance of children of this age of using concrete language. So when we speak and use euphemisms about death to children in this age group, we can cause confusion and misunderstanding. There are over 50 euphemisms for death in just the American English language alone. And many of them, when you think about it, are a little confusing. So if we say we lost grandpa, well, a child, well, lost, let's go find him, right? Or is he hungry or afraid? These are things that make sense to us. We have the connotation of what that death loss means, but a child does not. And so it's very kind, it's very caring and supportive when we're talking to children of this age. If we use simple, age appropriate, but concrete language like dead or died, and to answer their questions in age appropriate ways with those specific words or answers. Like we see in the green down there at the bottom, children can tell when an adult is not being truthful, and then they may wonder why, or it may cause even more fear. Kids are often afraid. While grief is very individual, there are some commonalities in different emotions that children feel. And one of those is fear. Anger is another one that's very common for children to feel. So we just want to reassure them by being as concrete as we can and just helping them to begin to understand that death is permanent. One simple way that we can do that is you can have a child find their heartbeat, or if they're a loved one to you, have them find your heartbeat. They can feel that, they can recognize that, and we can tell them that a heart beating is what keeps us alive, right? It's how we know someone is alive. And then we can explain to them that when a person dies, that heart stops beating and it doesn't start beating again. And it may take repeated, reassuring or explanations to help them understand that death is permanent. But with time, they will get there and understand that it's not reversible. With our 6 to 9-year-olds, we see in this developmental stage of child development, we see this egocentric mindset, right? They are all about me all the time. They aren't yet able to really consider the needs of others. They're getting there, but they're not quite there. And this leads to this magical thinking. So we call this age group our magical thinkers. And what this is that they have an increased incorrect sense of responsibility. So this is something we need to be looking out for and listening out for when we're working with children of these ages. And they may think that if they had just said, "I love you" to their brother before they went to school, that he would still be alive, that whatever happened wouldn't have happened. Or if I hadn't fought with my sister on the way to school, then that terrible thing wouldn't have happened and she would still be alive. So they associate more importance with their actions than is really reasonable, logical, or practical. As adults, we know that. And so one thing that we can do is just really reassure them that they're not responsible, that the death is not their fault, and that they didn't do anything to cause that death. I see a hand up, Jennifer. Are we just going to continue through the presentation until the end for questions?
Yeah, Ed, if you want to put your question in the chat, we can get to it once we get to that point in this session.
Thank you, Ed. If not, if you don't feel comfortable putting it in the chat, then we should be able to address that at the end of the presentation as well. All right, so I'll move on. So by 9 years, children have a concept of death that is very similar to adults. They really have begun their thinking phase that includes abstract thinking, but they still don't have those life experiences, like it says on the slide, or vocabulary to express what they're thinking or feeling. So they may ask a lot of questions, trying to kind of place things in their mind and to create that filing system where they can hang these things on to just make sense out of their world. But most importantly, we want to really be watching out for that magical thinking, be listening for that, and really gently reassure and correct them if we hear those things, that they're just not responsible. For our 9 to 12 years of age, we consider this our little fact collectors. So they're really going to begin to be curious and preoccupied with the circumstances of a death, right? They may be asking, did the ambulance come? Did the fire truck come? Were there paramedics? How long were they there? who went in the ambulance, right? They're going to be very preoccupied with these details or surrounding, right, the aspects or physical aspects of a death. They may want to know a lot about a diagnosis. And what we want to do is be very patient with children of this age, answer them in as truthful and age-appropriate ways as we can. They don't always, depending on the nature of the death, need all of the details, right? It might be more than they can handle, but we can be as honest as we can in an age-appropriate way, just to reassure them. Sometimes parents and teachers who spend a lot of time with children, they become concerned that this is maybe a morbid curiosity or a morbid fascination that is inappropriate. And so we really try when we are out in the community as Nidito, speaking with teachers, speaking in school districts, speaking with support staff, student services, counselors, social workers, to reassure them and the parents that we work with at Nidito on our campus that it is not morbid and it is absolutely appropriate for children of this age, even slightly younger to a slightly older, to really talk about the details and to just want to collect all those facts as that concept of death is expanding to look like what we know as an abstract view of death that we have as adults. As we move into our teens, our pre-adolescents here and our adolescents, they really are able to hold in their minds this abstract and subjective idea of death that adults have. They often, one of the things we see here though with teens is that we tend to parentify them a little too soon. And what I mean by that is because they look like adults, sometimes we treat them like adults. So this may look like a child having to or hearing from their parent or caregiver that they can't take part in that extracurricular activity because they need to get a job, or they need to maybe move through their grief or move on through their grief because they need to grow up and be the man of the house. So these are common things that we hear about teens. We tend to expect more out of them, and they sometimes forego their own activities or aspirations to support their family or help out with their family or to support their parent or caregiver who's grieving. And this is really dangerous. I know sometimes logistically in some families, this can't be avoided, right? Sometimes it is a necessity. But if in those cases, we can also offer them a space where they can feel safe physically and emotionally to deal with their grief, then we can see some positive outcomes. But the danger is that in those situations where a teen is having to maybe grow up a little bit faster because of a death loss, is we're sending them the message that their grief can wait, right? That their grief isn't as important as anyone else's in the family. They have this increased expectation to comfort their parent or their siblings. And this may result in them having difficulties concentrating, memory issues from their grief. It can cause unresolved or complicated grief. And what that looks like is later on as they age, if they haven't had a chance to really deal with, think about, and process their grief, we may see behaviors that are negative or dangerous that may cause harm to them or their future and prospects. So we want to make sure that if we're supporting and caring for someone in this age group, that we are very intentional that they have a space where they can process their grief. Teens are already pretty ego-centric, right? They're risk-taking. They don't worry about risks like we do as adults. They have less impulse control than we do as adults. And so what happens with grieving teens is those are heightened. And so we have a kind of a dangerous cocktail here, right? Where kids who maybe are getting their driver's licenses or having increased independence and moving about independently in the community on their own. If they're grieving and they're not getting an opportunity to process that grief, they may take risks that are even uncharacteristic for them before a death loss, or they may be more impulsive than they would have been before the death loss. And that obviously can affect their safety and their health and well-being. We call this age group our invisible grievers. Teens identify themselves through the lens of their peer groups, right? Through their connections and their social circles, and they want to be accepted. And so if they don't have a social group, if they don't have a community of teens who understand, they often will go silent. They won't talk about their grief. They're not going to share about it. They don't want to be the kid who's bumming everybody else out. They don't want to be the one to talk about their dead mom when nobody else understands. And so because they want to be accepted, if they don't have that community, they will go silent. Again, this can lead to unresolved grief. So this is what we're talking about there on the slide with the iceberg metaphor. If you imagine like an iceberg, we only see about 10% of it sticking out above the ocean. When in a teen, what we're seeing as far as what they're presenting or manifesting for their grief is only about 10% of their grief. So they are typically holding a lot of that below the surface in their inner life. And we just want to make sure that we're offering them those ways to process that grief. Just be sensitive to that fact. So in Arizona, 1 in 11 kids will experience the death of either a parent or a sibling before the age of 18. So this is it says right there, 2023 CBEM, that is the Childhood Bereavement Estimation Model that comes from the JAG Institute, which is the research arm of Judy's Place out of Denver, Colorado. And Judy's Place is a bereavement center, much like Nidito in many ways. We are both members of the National Alliance of Children's Grief. And they have this research arm that has done some amazing work helping to show the reality of what death, loss, and grieving looks like in children in our country. It's free. You can go on to that CBEM annually and at any time and really drill down to your county level and see what it looks like, what those statistics are for you in your county and for your state. So here in Arizona, we know that 1 in 11 kids are going to experience the death of a parent or sibling. Nationally, that's 1 in 12. So we are at a higher incident rate than the national. Also, 1 in 5 will experience the death of a close friend or family member, and 7 out of 10 teachers currently have at least one student in their class who's lost a parent, guardian, sibling, or close friend in the past year. So these numbers are really important. These numbers will let parents know that their children aren't alone, right? And they can also let children and teens know, young adults know, this is including up to the age of 18, that they're also not alone, right? If 1 in 11 kids in the state is grieving, that can be a revelation to our children, our teens, and our families and parents and caregivers. So I encourage you, if you work with this population, to share this in a way that makes sense or in a way that might help them know that they're not alone. Our teens are often really relieved to hear this number. It kind of just helps soften those feelings of isolation. I think all of us who have grieved have felt that isolation in our lives. Grief is so isolating. And so these statistics can kind of help us realize that we aren't alone in just a more black and white way. These can also be used, of course, when working to win grants or funding, when you're working with this population. So if that's you, the CBEM should be your friend. Definitely want to look that up and utilize those statistics. So we've talked about how grief is individual and it's really a mix of all these different factors of age and religious background and cultural background and the nature of the loss and the nature of the relationship. And then what does that look like, right? What does grief look like in a child? And so we have these 5 different reactions or these 5 different domains. And so we talk about emotional reactions, and this can be basically any emotion. Any emotion that a child could have can be a reaction to grief. And so our role as a supportive and caring adult is just to reassure children that like we were talking about earlier, even if they are experiencing relief, that's okay and that's normal, right? We want to acknowledge and validate their feelings. We want to let them know too, it's okay to experience joy. Like we were talking about with children who are grieving, it's those small bites of the apple intermittent with other things. So they naturally know how to regulate their bodies and to temper their response and their time spent in deep and heavy in their feelings by then moments of play. But sometimes they then have feelings of guilt or shame. because they did want to go to that birthday party, and they went to that party and they had a great time. But then they have to come back and realize, you know, that that person that they loved is still gone, and maybe their parent or caregiver is still very sad and grieving. And so navigating that both sides of the coin, right? That tension between joy and pain and sadness and happiness and relief and anger, all of those things children are going to struggle with more so sometimes even than adults. So we can just reassure them and acknowledge where they are, meet them where they are, and let them know that it's okay and normal. Physical reactions, we can talk about weight loss or weight gain. We can talk about changes in sleep. Children may sleep a lot if they're grieving, or they may become insomniacs and for a period of time and sleep very little. We may have children that are having these frequent trips to the nurse's office, right, at school, with mystery headaches or stomach aches that nobody can seem to get to the bottom of. Those are all very common and very normal for children. They're going to feel their grief in their body. Their grief is very physical. So these manifestations are also very common. Trying to think of anything else. Stomach issues, gastrointestinal issues. Our immune systems are often weakened when we are grieving, right? Grief is such a burden on our whole body, on our whole just neurological system and our immune system, that will be more susceptible to illness. So you may have children especially who are having frequent colds, right? They spend weeks with bronchitis or other upper respiratory ailments or illnesses, and it just doesn't seem like they're ever getting better. Unfortunately, that's really common. The more supportive that we can be to them, the more we can help them move through that to a place where their whole body feels more stabilized and that immune system can really do its job. We'll have cognitive reactions. This can be anything from disbelief, right? Just not believing that this death has occurred, just an inability to understand, doubting that it really did happen, maybe believing in some cases where it's not entirely resolved or clear what happened, that the person didn't die, that they maybe just ran away or disappeared and they're going to come back. Cognitively, we can also see brain fog, memory loss, up to 2 years after death in death loss for a child. That is considered the raw window, so to speak, or the period where you will see the most manifestations in these 5 areas of their grief. It doesn't mean that their grief times out after 2 years. Grief is not something that is linear, that we can check off boxes. It's present with us forever, and in fact, children will even re-grieve, right? So a 5-year-old who's lost someone important to them, their special person, they're going to grieve that loss, and they're going to grieve it in a way that is developmentally and age appropriate for them at 5, and they may grieve that loss at 10, again, in a different way that is developmentally appropriate for a 10-year-old, maybe again at 15 or 16, maybe when they reach some of these milestones. I know for my children, it was a really big deal to get their driver's license. That may be something that is activating or triggering for a child who lost a parent way back when they were 3 or 4 years old. So this is this idea of re-grief. Children are going to re-grieve these losses as they continue to grow and mature and develop, and they're going to grieve that loss through those lenses of their experience and their development at different stages and at different milestones of their life. So these cognitive reactions can look like brain fog, memory loss, inability to focus. That can be because they're preoccupied with their special person who's died. It can be that they're just kind of suppressed. So just like our immune system can be suppressed by grief, our whole brain and cognitive ability, our executive function, those can also all be suppressed, and we're more using our survival brain, or our lizard brain, as some people call it, when we're talking about trauma. And so we may see kids that are just, they have this heightened survival response, and it just causes them to not be able to remember those math facts, right? Those multiplication tables they knew 2 weeks ago. It's just gone. That doesn't mean it's gone forever, but it means that over time, as they learn to cope and develop coping skills and feel support, maybe engage in peer support or one-on-one therapy or just have a supportive parent or caregiver or somebody else that they can talk to, they'll be able to cope and get back to a space of grounding or centering or stabilization. Behavioral and socially, we can see tantrums, acting out, those risk-taking behaviors, those impulse control issues that I talked about with teens, that falls into this behavioral and social. We can also see kids who were social butterflies become very much loners or isolating. We can see kids who were very much perhaps described as introverted become social butterflies. We can see kids who were A students becoming not A students. We can see kids who, maybe weren't very good in school now feeling like it's really important to have perfect behavior and to have perfect school grades and perfect attendance, right? They don't want to cause any more distress to that parent or caregiver because they know that they're grieving. And so they will often sometimes become perfect. And that's very stressful. That's very hard to maintain. So we'll see that in children sometimes as well. And then spiritual reactions, we can see a leaning into a faith tradition or a pulling away. We can see kids who want to explore different wisdom traditions or different practices, or really want to adopt and dive into their own family or their own household's practices or beliefs. So it can really be, just the whole pendulum or whole spectrum of experiences. So we'll move now into a few practical things that we can do. And I always want to preface this by saying it's always better to say something than to say something on the not to say list. Sometimes just as a culture, as a society, we're not very good with grief. We're not very good about talking about death and dying, and we can be even more shy or awkward about that with children, right? We really don't want to upset them, or we really try to sugarcoat things. But I just want to encourage you, if you can take away one thing from tonight's talk, it's just that it's always better to say something than to say nothing. And yeah, I hope you can kind of internalize that. You can take that with you. I would also say, if when we get to the slide of not to say, you've said some of those things, please be kind to yourself. There's no guilt, there's no shame. We all do the best that we can with the tools that we have in the moment. And that's all that we can do. So give yourself grace, give yourself some mercy, and don't worry about things that maybe are wrong or that you shouldn't have said. And then finally, I would say that not everything on the to say list might fit you. So if you think about hats, not every hat that fits me is maybe going to fit David. I have a very, very small head. And most men have larger heads than I do. And so, our hats are not going to be the same. What feels comfortable to him or what looks good on him or reflects his style might not be what looks good on me or that reflects my style. I'm sorry, I'm picking on you, David. Thank you for being a good sport. So our phrases, our supportive phrases, our things to say are the same way. We all have been conditioned or trained, right? We're very accustomed to saying certain things. And so not all of these are going to fit with you. They're not going to feel organic or comfortable with you. So I would just encourage you to try them on, just like you would try hats on, try some of these phrases on, and maybe incorporate a what to say with a what not to say phrase that you already say. For me, I will tell you as we move there, I have one of those. So we want to avoid saying these things. You'll notice the second one on the left is I'm sorry. And that's something many of us are conditioned to say at a funeral, right? Or to someone who's experienced a death loss. It flies out of my mouth unbidden. I can't stop it sometimes. And instead of just worrying or panicking, I've adopted a couple supportive phrases or to say or things you should try to say that flow very nicely for me. So I encourage you all to be open in your minds about that and open in your hearts. When I present this to live audiences and we can be more interactive in a little bit easier way than we can tonight, the one I get the most questions about is I'm sorry. And so I will talk about that one. If you see one on this list that you would also like to talk about, perhaps we can get to that in the Q&A as well. But I'm sorry can be problematic because of the response, right, that we're conditioned to say. So if I step on my son's foot and I say, oh, I'm sorry, Jake, he's going to say, it's okay, Mom, right? It's okay. That is the conditioned response to I'm sorry. Even when we're saying that to someone who's grieving a loss, I'm so sorry for your loss. And they're going to say, it's okay, probably unconsciously without even realizing it. And so what we've done is we've just very quietly shifted the burden now. We're no longer comforting the person who is grieving. Now they are comforting us. They're telling us it's okay. And so that's why I'm sorry can be problematic sometimes. Many grievers that we hear from also say I'm sorry feels empty because it's overused. It doesn't feel authentic or genuine. It feels very automatic. It's something people just say without much intentionality or thought. That being said, some people do tell us that it feels very comforting to them. So we do want to also think about the relationship between the people that are having this conversation and the heart and the tone and facial expression. All of these things can change how it feels to the griever. These are just some things to maybe be aware of as we consider how it might feel to someone who's grieving to have these things shared with them. We want to be very careful. We see several on here that have time in them. I've mentioned already that grief is not linear, and that means it doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't have a date when someone should have moved on or moved past or let go of their grief. That's a grief myth, frankly. People don't ever move on or let go of the people that they love who have died, and nor should they. We know from the research that continuing bonds are very important for all grievers, but especially for children. So creating an environment and a space for them to continue that relationship. At Nidito, we have something called the telephone of the wind. It's just one way. There are many, many ways to have continuing bonds. So we have a telephone that is not connected to any phone lines. It is installed in a tree, kind of on the edge of our playground area. Most of our support groups take place at night in the evenings, Monday through Thursday evenings at our Princeton Mountain campus. And we do have some twinkle lights in the tree. So it is a little bit of an enchanting space. But children can go over there, they can pick up that receiver. And again, there's no sound, it's not connected to anything, but it's a little bit in a private area. They can go over there and they can maybe have a conversation with their loved one who has died. And that's been very therapeutic and very supportive for members of our community to be able to have those conversations. So that's one way to have continuing bonds. It's just an example that there's never a time to put it behind you, and time doesn't heal all wounds. So be very sensitive about using any phrases or sayings that talk about time when we're trying to be supportive and caring to grievers. And then, of course, we always want to be careful about those at least statements, right? I don't think there's a way to use at least that doesn't minimize or decrease the value or emotion or belief of what someone is saying. Anytime we say at least, we are minimizing whatever we've just heard. So we always want to be really, really careful about those sneaky at least statements. If you're someone like myself who by nature, by training growing up, I'm the oldest of 7. So I'll just let that kind of sit with you for a second. I'm very directive in nature. Some people have used, terms like bossy about me before. And so I have naturally kind of use at least statements, and I'm learning to do better. It's something I've been very intentional about with my own children, just in parenting. And I've seen how dangerous and how harmful it can be. And especially when we're talking about things of the heart, and when we're talking about pain, and when we're talking about grief. Brené Brown has an excellent video on YouTube. You can Google Brené Brown and empathy versus sympathy. And it's an illustrated video with her voiceover narration that really does the best job I've ever seen of showing how dangerous at least statements can be. So look that up later tonight. Okay, so here we have our things to try, our do-says. For me, because that I'm sorry flies out of my mouth, I often pair that with, I don't know what to say, but I want you to know I'm here if you need to talk. So for me, that feels very easy. That feels very comfortable. It feels very authentic and true. So again, you can kind of take something that was maybe on that avoid saying list, and when you pair it with one of the things like these statements on this list, it can transform into something supportive and something that we would call a conversation starter. So those avoid saying statements tend to be conversation stoppers. They shut down the griever, especially a child, and they prevent them from talking about their pain. And we're going to see a video here in a second that's going to talk a little bit more about that. So these are conversation starters. These are things that will allow someone to have opportunity to talk about their grief if they want to. And that's really important when we're talking about kids. Oops, I went the wrong way. I'm going to kind of breeze through those real quick and go ahead to the video because I think it does a better job than those slides anyway.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary, everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. "You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them." Or, "You know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off." Or, "I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture?" We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
There we go. I think that video does a beautiful job of showing how we can be acknowledging and be supportive and allow the grieving, especially children, to feel supported and to have the opportunity to talk about their grief, and to maybe begin to take a look at it and to work through it and process it. So again, here at Nidito, we are on a mission to create a community of acceptance and understanding for those grieving a serious medical condition or death, with that vision that no child grieves alone. We do have a peer group for families, for children who have a parent or caregiver who is experiencing a serious medical condition or diagnosis. We provide a support group for those families, for those children to come together with other kids who are also maybe beginning to grieve that ambiguous loss of a parent who has a serious medical diagnosis or condition. We also provide one-on-one support for children who are diagnosed. We don't have a peer support group for diagnosed children. Often they are not able to participate in a peer group in that way due to the just realities of their diagnosis or treatment. But we do have support specialists who go into hospitals here locally, into treatment centers, and provide one-on-one support for kids who are diagnosed, as well as their siblings. Their siblings can come to our campus and they can have play therapy and support from our support specialists as well. And we also support those parents and caregivers one-on-one. So they may have coffee right in the hospital cafeteria or something while their child is in for treatment. Many of these families don't even live in Tucson. They're from Southern Arizona. And so they receive the support from Nidito while they're here in town getting treatment. So those are some of the ways that we support those grieving the loss of health. And then we do have bereavement groups for those experiencing the death of a loved one. And you can see there that parent's serious illness diagnosis and the child's serious illness diagnosis as well. We have those peer support groups for children, teens, young adults, and their parents and caregivers. We, again, do not charge anything for any of these services. These are all free. They do not need to have insurance or even give us their insurance information at all. We don't collect that. We also, in that mission to create that community of acceptance and support, we do grief education. So we go around to schools as far away as Cochise County, and we provide grief education to teachers and school districts. We also do grief response in our local schools. So that would have to be here in Tucson and closer, to our main campus here in Pima County. But we can go into a school, whether that's a private school, charter school, public school, and provide that those trained staff members who can hold space, right? Who can just really be present and sit with those children that are grieving in the wake of a death of a classmate or of a teacher. We can also provide resources and support to faculty and staff who are therefore also grieving, and maybe supporting children through that as well. So those are some of our important programs and some of the important work that we do here in Tucson and Pima County and Greater Southern Arizona. Our services are not counseling or therapy. We do not provide that. We don't currently even have anyone on our staff. So we focus on peer support and peer-to-peer interaction. We do that with guided discussion questions and age-appropriate activities that aim to educate the children and their parents and caregivers that come for peer support about grief and provide them emotional support. And we do that through the power of play with art, imagination, physical activity, and games. All our kids 4 through 18 that come for peer support groups have free time. That's half their time at Nidito is spent in free time. And it is unguided, undirected, child-led, pure recess or free time. They can choose inside or outside spaces. We have 3 inside spaces. We have something called the volcano room, which provides positive reinforcement for those big feelings that feel like maybe they're going to erupt like a volcano out of us. and we can just affirm and acknowledge those feelings in kids and give them a safe way to release those feelings that doesn't harm themselves or others. We have an imagination room that is chock full of different imaginative play items and ideas. And then we have an art room that is also fully stocked, and they can choose to make or create whatever they want or imagine or play whatever they want. And then our outside spaces, we have a playground, swing set, some outdoor musical instruments, and we have a basketball court, which also doubles as a huge sidewalk chalk canvas, which is really popular at this time of year as well. And then, of course, we aim to teach all the children and parents and caregivers that come positive coping skills, so that as they carry that grief with them in their lives and they experience those waves of grief, those sinking feelings when the grief maybe feels overwhelming, they have those skills that they can rely on and that they can return to. So that is the end of my presentation. I thank you all for listening, and I will turn it back over to David, and we can begin the question and answer portion.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I was wondering, do you all also have books, a library, something that people can borrow there if they're looking for help in terms of working with kids at different age groups?
We do. We have a resource library. It's kind of like a take one, leave one library, if you're familiar with those, or a little free library. It is inside, so it's only open during our regular business hours of 9 to 4. But yeah, you can come in and you can check out a book or a resource and just return that when you're able and when you're done. We also have book lists. So I have a pretty comprehensive PDF. I mean, obviously there's always new books and resources, so it's not always up to the minute updated, but I do have a PDF resource of books that we use, some standbys that we use for children, teens, and adult resources, whether we're talking about serious medical condition or more in the bereavement, death, and dying space as well. Talking about emotions and feelings that kids face when they're grieving as well. So that is something that I can provide. I don't know if you have a way to email the participants who've attended tonight, but I can send a follow-up email to Jennifer or you, David, and attach that resource if people are interested in it.
That would be great. We do send out another email, so it would be a wonderful follow-up for folks. And everyone, you're welcome to put questions into the chat box. You could also, I think, Jennifer, am I speaking correctly, unmute yourself and just ask a question. This group is pretty good at doing that and is used to that. But so it sounds like you utilize books and find it helpful in terms of a child seeing an experience that they may be able to relate to in the book and talk about things that way as well.
Yeah, I
have a question.
Oh, please go ahead, Ed.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Mine was pertaining to the age period 6 to 9, and wanted to get it in that conversation, because my question is about grandparents and relating to grandchildren, and you have a multi-tier situation where the parents are in between and may have a different opinion about how to deal with certain questions. And I had that situation in my family where the mother had a different opinion about how to treat my grandchildren, how to answer their questions. So very difficult situation.
Oh, it always is. I think that's one of those grandparent dilemmas, right? That I think a lot of grandparents face with helping to raise and support grandchildren. There sometimes are those differences of opinion for sure. I think that's a pretty common. You're not alone in that, Ed, at all, I don't think. Was there something in particular that you struggled with? Did you have a grandchild that was grieving and
well, yeah, my son committed suicide about 9 years ago, and his two sons were age about 11 and 8 at the time, and their mother did not want to tell them that he committed suicide. She wanted to make up a story, and I was totally opposed to that. I thought truth was the better way to do it. So anyway, that was the big. And right today, I don't even know today what they've been told. So I really am. It's a very delicate situation in our family.
It is. I think that when we talk about stigmatized deaths, like death by suicide, it can be very delicate for many families. That's a difficult situation to navigate, especially when you have strong feelings about how you want your grandchildren, to be treated, and the information you want them to have, and when that can differ. I know at Nidito we encounter that sometimes as well, those differences. And so while you hear me saying maybe some best practices for different age groups, we still have parents and children who join our support groups where the parents have not disclosed to the child the manner of death or the cause of death to their children. That's not something that we, of course, share for them as the parent and caregiver in our situation. Professionals versus a parent or caregiver, we of course respect their decision and let them take the lead in that. But in general, children usually do benefit from the truth in an age-appropriate way that is as concrete and accurate in language as we can do. But yeah, some people are really uncomfortable with that for sure.
How do you handle it when a child maybe asks you a question about life beyond death and you don't know the family's belief system, if they have a belief at all about that? How do you approach that?
Yeah, at Nidito specifically, it's really important to us that it's a safe space, right? Nidito means your little nest in Spanish, and the idea behind that name and our origin of our name is that it is a space that is safe and comforting, like as a nest would be for baby birds or for eggs, right? And so it's outward facing. It's Nidito or Tucson. This is your little nest. We want you to be able to come here and feel safe. And so to create that, that place of safety, we do have to honor anyone and any beliefs that they have and that they bring into that space, right? We want everyone to feel comfortable, and we want them to feel acknowledged and heard, even when there may be a wide variety of different practices or beliefs present. So what we train our volunteers to do in that situation, David, is to really use reflective listening, right? To mirror back. So sometimes that can look like if you have a young child that's asking, well, what happened when, their loved one, their special person died, or where did they go? We can ask questions like, well, what does your family say? What do you say in your house? How do you guys talk about it? Or what do you think? And sometimes children will just come right back with an answer that is profound and staggering. And so we will honor whatever they say in that way. So I always train our volunteers, you don't have to have answers to life's existential questions to volunteer at Nidito, because we don't actually want you to answer any questions in a directive or advice-giving way. We want you to really mirror and reflect back what that child believes or thinks. That can be a little bit difficult when they get older and they really want to know what you think. So then in that situation, if you're talking to a teen, I would first try to find out what they believe or what their cultural or community beliefs are, what their family believes. And then if they really are just like, yeah, but I want to know what you believe, then I would share that in as in an appropriate and sensitive way as you can, that acknowledges that there's differences in beliefs.
I can share a personal experience that was really helpful to me. I lost my brother in Vietnam in 1968. And the very helpful thing to me was a man that came and said that he had lost his brother in World War II. And that meant the most to me, to talk to him about his experience. So that was one thing that personally helped me a lot.
Yeah, Ed, that's exactly what peer support is.
Mhm.
That is that secret sauce, right? That magic ingredient that our families find when they come to Nidito, when our children are in our peer support groups, is that feeling that they're not alone. That is one of the most important things for children who are grieving, is that they really know that they're not alone. So thank you for sharing that, Ed. I think that's really beautiful.
During your presentation, Alan was affirming how people sometimes children get branded with a morbid curiosity, and how we all need to find ways and to educate ourselves to embrace the opportunity to address and teach all we can about death and dying and grief. Mm-hmm. And about, like you said, maintaining ongoing relationships with who have died in whatever form that looks like for a person, and not seeing that as somehow pathological or as inappropriate grief.
Yeah, sometimes people really do, people who are grieving, they get that pressure, right? Are you going to put those pictures away? Are you going to take those pictures off your nightstand? Are you going to stop wearing that ring? When are you going to put your wedding ring away? Those are things that as adults that we hear. And for kids too, they get that same pressure to just move on. And I hope little by little, one talk at a time, one volunteer trained at a time, we can help to really just break that myth and let people know that those continuing bonds, that ongoing relationship is more important. That can, look like something like the Telephone of the Wind, which also is a community resource and is open to anyone who would like to use it during our business hours. But we also, we have a photo wall at Nidito for our special people who've died. So just by putting those photos up on a wall in a place where everybody walks by them, that can be a way to foster continuing bonds. Talking about people, one of the most supportive things that we can do when we're engaging with people who are grieving, especially children, is just ask, what was the name of your brother who died, right? We want to talk about our loved ones who've died, and we want to say their name. And sometimes it's sad things, but you're not bringing it up, or you're not reminding them about something. Those people, the people that we love, we haven't forgotten about them. We're thinking about them every day. So
Of
just
course,
asking,
they are
yeah,
our angels. They are our angels, right? They are angels in our head. Angels in our head.
exactly. So, asking people for the names of their loved ones that have died is really a powerful practice.
When you spoke about grief at different milestones in children's lives and as they age, it just reminded me how we all do that. Adults go through that as well at different times and different anniversaries, and how important it is to keep showing up for people and, like you say, checking in and remembering with them the person who has died. So that they know it's okay to do that, and it's okay to continue to talk about it, and it's okay to still be grieving and feel all of those emotions that will well up, maybe through grief bursts, as people call them sometimes. But I really appreciated you talking about grief, how that happens for children and youth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I think sometimes we aren't used to thinking about. You may hear people in conversation, saying things about, well, didn't their mom die when they were 2? And they're still grieving, at 14. Sometimes people just they're not really probably thinking about it. I think most people who have caring hearts and who are concerned adults, if you give them a moment and you lead them into it, they realize that they're maybe not being practical or reasonable. But it is common. It's a common reaction that we hear. I heard it from one of our volunteers recently. Well, but their parent died 10 years ago. They're still grieving. Yeah, they are. They're grieving now as a 14-year-old instead of a 4-year-old. And just gently being able to remind them about this concept of grief. We were able to get back into a place of acceptance and acknowledgement. But yeah, it is an important concept, and not everybody who isn't familiar with grieving and with death and dying is comfortable with that, or just used to hearing about it. I would like to recommend Sesame Street Workshop. If you are interacting with preschoolers and young children, they have a whole portion of their website of resources on death and dying or on grieving, and you can just Google Sesame Street Workshop. And death and dying, I think is what I Googled, but something in that zone, and you'll get their videos. There's a whole series that Elmo and Jessie do. I think it's Jessie is the other puppet, the other character, who has I think her dad dies in that plot line. And so there's some wonderful videos where they explore these concepts of regrief and continuing bonds, and how to talk to children in a concrete and age-appropriate way. They can be really helpful for adults just to watch, to kind of then get language and a stance in your head before you go speak to a child, or they can be useful to watch together with children as well. And there's a host of other resources on their website to go along with those videos.
I appreciated it so much when you said it's better to say something than nothing. And it's okay to mess up, and it's really important to just keep practicing. That we're going to get better at it, just like everything else. We're going to get better at talking about death and dying, and be comfortable with all the unanswerable questions that come up, and feel like we just need to keep practicing talking about this. So the fact that you can say all the times that you mess up and put your foot in your mouth and keep going, people really appreciate the effort in trying to express compassion and care, even if we say things in less helpful ways, and then can learn to laugh about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a firm believer in that. I have said, I think, some truly awful things unintentionally. I wasn't trying to be insensitive. It was coming from a place of care and concern, but I've learned, and I'm hopefully doing better and can be more supportive. But I know that it was still better for me to say something than to say nothing. We talk with teachers a lot who are very afraid to bring it up. When they know they've been notified maybe by school personnel or administrators that a significant death loss has occurred with one of their students, but they don't want to upset the child. They don't want to be in a space maybe that the child doesn't feel safe or something, and maybe they're not the right adult to have that conversation. But what we find is kids who know that adults know, and adults don't talk about it, they don't acknowledge it, that's harmful. That we know is harmful.
Absolutely.
So just be awkward, be weird, say the wrong thing, but say something.
Steve, did you have something that you wanted to say?
She just took care of it. Thank you. Rachel took care of it.
That's great. And there's a question here that says, if you have a 5-year-old who emotes and acts more like the 9 to 12 age group, what becomes age appropriate?
Well, I think that's a situation where we meet them where they are, right? So some kids are going to develop it at a different time frame or on a different time scale than other kids. I think we see that in all forms of childhood development. Some kids just are not on the chart, right? They're an outlier on those growth charts even. And so I think when we're talking about grief, we can come at it from that same place or that same mindset. So I would just meet them where they are. And just be willing to sit with them in that space of what they're comfortable with or what they seem to be able to handle. And I think that's a good approach, right? We can use reflective listening as a really powerful tool. And what I mean by that, it really is, not naming emotions for children, letting them tell you that they're sad, asking them questions like, well, how did that make you feel? Or how are you feeling now that your mom is gone or your mom has died, right? And letting them name that emotion instead of saying, I bet you're sad that your mom died. Let them name that emotion. That's one of those slightly higher, maybe ninja level skills of reflective listening, is just asking those open-ended questions that really allow the child to use the language that feels right to them. And then we reflect that back, right? Oh, you're sad. You're sad that your mom died, right? What do you miss doing with your mom? Well, I miss, pancakes on Sunday morning. Oh, you miss pancakes on Sunday morning. Your mom used to make pancakes, right? So you're letting them tell you how they're feeling. You're letting them tell you what they miss, and then you're just giving it back to them. And, it's like that video, it seems too simple to be of use, but there's so much power in letting them hear that you've listened and you've heard, and also just hear their own words back to them. It's just so affirming and it's so acknowledging.
I did put a quote in the chat
Oh,
that's related to that.
Yes, you did. I see that, Steve. Thank you.
Could you read that, David?
Yeah, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable.
that's truly listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just
Thank
with
you,
our
Steve.
ears.
Yeah. Any last questions or comments that somebody wants to make?
Hey, I had a question about I haven't been to the Nidito website, but is there any sort of origin story for how Nidito came to be? Because I have, for the last few years, I would love to open a community death center here in Charlotte, and I'm curious to see how different organizations get started. Is there more information like that on the site?
That's a really great question, Angela. And I am not 100%, but I believe that that is on our website. If I can just give you the really, really shortened version. Nidito was founded about 27 years ago here in Tucson by a group of concerned professionals and family members. So we had medical professionals, we had mental health and behavioral health professionals, and we had families who had been impacted themselves by a death of a special person, and they all came together. Originally, Nidito started as children with a parent with cancer, and then later evolved and grew to address bereavement and death loss as well. Those families that came originally for support while they were grieving the loss of health, now they needed support in their death loss and in the wake of their death. And so that's kind of how we grew to be Nidito. That name does come from one of our families. We had Jimmy Bussey, was a child who was who's diagnosed with cancer. And as a result, if you're familiar with kids and families who have medical diagnosis such as cancer, they often lose their home, right? Or they have to move a lot because of loss of income, moving to a treatment center or facility or closer to one in a major metro area. These sorts of things. And that happened with Jimmy's family as well. And every time he came home, to create this sense of stability and comfort and safety in their home, they created his nest. And that was a special place on their couch for Jimmy. And I think, as the story goes, they were able to have the same sofa as well. So it was a familiar piece of furniture with his blankets, his toys, his stuffed animals. I understand that there was also an old school Nintendo involved. And so every time he would come home, that was his nest. And his grandmother was bilingual. And when she was a part with his family of creating Nidito and founding it and naming it, that's where our name comes from Nidito, your little nest. So from Jimmy's nest on the couch to now Nidito, Tucson's nest, being a safe place for families and children to come.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Steve, did you want to say something?
Just, Angela, if you know how to get into the chat, I put a name of someone you could contact about what you're trying to do.
Yes, excellent resource.
And you can find a link to, I think, get a hold of Mariana Cacciatore through the learning community for loss, grief, and transition.
Okay. Yeah, I was on one of her meetings on here too. So thank you.
You're welcome. Rachael, thank you so much for this evening. You are a true gift to this community. The first time we talked, I was excited that you were willing and able to come and share with us, but it was such a learning experience, I think, for all of us, and we appreciate the dialogue tonight.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being willing to have this space, and thank you to all of you. I think I saw somewhere during the meeting that there were 29 people here gathered tonight, just taking some time out, making space to learn about grief and how to be supportive, and that touches me and it inspires me to keep doing the work that we're doing at Nidito. So thank you all for coming and making the time as well.
Now, Rachael is welcome to sign off if she has things to do, but everybody else has to stick around. Jennifer?
Yes, we're so grateful to you, Rachael, but we are going to ask you all to stick around just for a few more minutes. We do have a poll that we would like you to answer about tonight's session. It is 7 questions. And you'll want to make sure that you complete all 7 questions before you hit submit. So I will launch that now. And then while we're doing that, David's going to talk about some of our upcoming sessions that we have coming up.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to get the poll off my screen. I couldn't see what was in front of me. We hope you all join us again next month on Thursday, May 16th at 6 p.m., where we'll have a session entitled Where Words Fail, Music Speaks. It will be presented by a panel of therapeutic musicians and music therapists who have years of caring for individuals and their loved ones through end of life, talking about the importance of music during that time, but also in the grieving process as well. So we hope you can join us next month on May 16th. And then on June 13th, it is a week earlier than we normally do this. So I just want to lift that up. Normally it's the 3rd Thursday that we gather, but our presenter, Dr. Margaret Carlock, is not able to be with us for that 3rd Thursday. So we're doing it a week earlier at 6 p.m. And the topic will be using creative arts expression as a supportive tool for grief. We hope that you can join us as we learn more about how we are able to different aspects of grief and loss through creative expressive arts.
And as David mentioned earlier, we are so grateful to everyone who's donated for tonight's session and all of our sessions so far this year. We just want to share a couple of other ways that you can support Roots and Roads. You can make a direct donation on our website, rootsandroads.org/donations. We also partner with a few different shopping apps where when you sign up, you can shop for Christmas, for birthdays, you can buy gift cards, whatever it is, and a portion will come to Roots and Roads. And so you can do that through shopraise.com, also Walmart's Spark Good. And then you can also link Roots and Roads to your Fry's community rewards if you are shopping for groceries at Fry's. And we are really excited that we are now a qualified charitable organization for the Arizona Charitable Tax Credit. So if you file taxes in Arizona, you can receive a dollar for dollar tax credit on your Arizona state taxes. I know tax day was just a few days back, but you can make donations for 2024 now. So you can visit our website for more information. And that is the end of our evening. Thank you for joining us. If you're still working on your survey, we'll stick around. You can go ahead and complete that. But if you're done, we wish everyone a good night and we hope to see you next month.
Thanks, everybody.